Welcome. We are live here in Tallinn, Estonia. My name is Kaspar Korjus. I'm the co-founder of Pactum. Before anything else, I would like to introduce you to our two most distinguished guests. We have the President of the Republic of Estonia, Madam Kersti Kaljulaid.
Hi, Kaspar.
Hi. And we have Jann Tallinn, the founding engineer of Gaza and Skype. And more recently, of course, the co-founder of the Future of Life Institute and the co-founder of the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risks. Welcome.
Hello.
Happy to have you here. Today's topic, what we'll cover, is how can AI help solve issues that require global coordination. Global challenges such as climate warming or trade agreements require all the states to work together and to make sacrifices. And this is of course very difficult because we don't want to make sacrifices and we are each in different level of stage of development. And there are so many trade-offs to do and so many terms to do, I can't even imagine Brexit deal. And then we need to reach an agreement. So let's try to address this topic. In the first part of this discussion, let's go through and understand how these discussions are happening today. What's the process there? Because for me, I'm super interested to understand. Because I don't think we have transparency in society also, how this all works. And the second part of the discussion, let's go to the future. And let's see whether we have any hope in technology which could help humans in the process. So, Madam Kersti Kaljulaid, does this topic resonate with you well?
Yes, it does resonate really well, because if you look at how developed societies have got trapped, then it is normally because they have misunderstood what is the cause of a situation which they want to remedy. I give you just one example. People gradually in bigger cities are unable to pay their living cost because their salaries are not covering their full cost of living, which means enterprises are underpaying. They are not covering the full cost of labor. Well, what is the reaction of most governments? The reaction of most governments is social support, which takes away people's self-esteem, even if they now are supported to, keep living where they are used to live and keep serving the people in these rich parts of their countries or towns. Now, gradually, more and more people, even educated people, fall into this trap that they need social support to live, let's say, in certain parts of London, Paris. I think also Tallinn is on this way, looking at the real estate price rises here. What we really need to do is make sure that enterprises pay full cost of labor. Why should they do it? Because it's definitely more expensive to pay taxes and then allow government to imperfectly distribute these taxes to support the cost of their labor. Yet what we see is exactly this stupid triangle.
Yeah, and very good point. When we now look on a global level, and as the President of Estonia, you have witnessed many kind of global problems what today nations are trying to solve, and the most recent, most likely COVID-19 vaccination passport, something that needs coordination. Could you please explain to me and to the audience, what does it look like? How nations are conducting these negotiations?
I would take a little bit simpler example. Let's say we are a year ago and we all lack masks and equipment to fight COVID.
Yeah.
Now it took us several months to realize that if we leave markets alone, the supply will rise and within 6 months the problem will be solved. But we probably wasted about 2-3 months because we went by our protectionist instinct. The same about the COVID vaccination. Similarly, we don't realize that the higher risk is that new versions of the virus develop in the least developed societies. Then facing the risk that maybe we are not able to guarantee the supplies in our own societies. Yeah. And we have insured ourselves. Many countries have bought 3, 4, 5 times more vaccines than they actually need. Yeah. Yet they are reluctant to distribute them. Yeah. Again, now the vaccines are here. In 6 months, everybody's nerves start to relax. And we realize that, we can move forward. I think it is the imperfect nature of human beings. And of course now, if you ask me the question, could we do it better globally? Then, political decision is never based on dry facts. Political decision is always supported by the emotions of the people. Politicians cannot do much if the emotional trend of the people is against it.
Very good point, yeah. And when we take this as an example that if we are overusing the doses and we don't share them equally, and then eventually the disease comes back to us and hurts us, if there is this consensus and understanding, then what is the problem? Like, why don't we share that more equally then? Or what stops us in that coordination efforts?
Gradually we realize it simply takes time. I mean, the inefficiency is closely related to the time. I mean, gradually, every time when countries tie themselves into knots, they understand they've done it. And then they undo these knots. But some knots, this kind of middle income class falling into the trap of social support knot is there, and it's growing. And it started probably sometime in 1960s, latest 70s. Everybody recognizes, I know this from my discussions in the OECD, everybody recognizes it. Yet we are unable to move. Yeah. And then we think that the remedy is to rise the tax part of the GDP, then there we come out with the initiatives of the global income tax and all these things to continue this negative spiral. Instead of simply telling the companies that, I mean, just cover the full cost of your labor, for heaven's sake, it's not so difficult.
Thank you. Jann, you have extensively studied global coordination, and I think every second AI book I read is praising your work in the field. Like, do you have remedies there? Like, do you have like understanding now after these years of like what could be these next steps? Not speaking about the future, but now, like in today's time frame, like to solve, let's say with this example, COVID vaccination efforts.
Hi, I mean, there are no simple answers there. On a fundamental level, there's always, or on abstract level, there's always kind of tension between kind of short-term and long-term and local and global. So like, as we know, like every person has encountered situations where it's kind of, they know that it's in the long term it's good for them to do X, go to gym and whatnot, but locally, nah, not really. So it's about kind of finding compromises between kind of short-term interest and long-term interest, but also geographically, like local interests and global interests. And one reason why sort of the global interests, first of all, why they are difficult to address is that on a very top level, the world is an anarchy. So there's like, although there are kind of cooperation attempts like UN and things like that, they're not like working like super well. And like why it's super important is that as the technology gets more and more powerful, the planet gets smaller, so to speak, because the effective radius of every new technological intervention gets bigger and bigger. So it's, I think even with COVID, we see that like perhaps it wasn't a lab leak, but it easily could have been. There have been lab leaks before, and it's obvious that like lab leaks, we will have more lab leaks in the future, and lab leaks are like 21st century thing, or like end of 20th century thing, which is an example how there is like we need more global agreements to control these externalities, as they are called. And like obviously, like one way to try to do that is kind of recruit the help of technology. Like why the technology is getting more powerful.
Let's come back to this very soon.
All right.
Before, and I don't want to go to technology and future with like a very critical view of today's, because like the world is more as a single like organism now compared to like centuries ago, we can argue.
In addition, we fulfilled all the Millennium Development Goals, not by political but economic efforts. So we are actually better off than we were probably.
Yeah. And we have signed some agreements like Paris Agreement, which seems also like at least some steps towards like
60% of the global economy is under some kind of climate agreement.
Exactly right. And so question to you, Jann, is that if you have studied these kind of, do you see any like common best practices, similarities between like coordinations which have resulted in a positive way?
So there are three global coordination examples that can be considered successes as far that I'm aware of. Probably there are more. Like one is the ozone layer, kind of coordinating globally to stop producing the chemicals called CFCs. Then there is getting rid of the lead in gasoline. And the third one is smallpox eradication. And but there is like also important failures. I think the most interesting failure that is kind of more and more relevant as we're talking about kind of powerful technology is the failure of the Baruch Plan, which was the idea that US would give up the control over nuclear weapons to the UN. And there was like almost that almost went through, but it failed because Soviet Union was against it in the end because they have lost trust, and now there are like kind of scholars all over the world trying to figure out like what went wrong and how can we kind of avoid those mistakes next time.
And do they know what went wrong?
Like, I mean, I'm not an expert in this particular area, but what I've heard is that there was just politicians took a too long time, and kind of they had time. There was like a agreement, international agreement between scientists and engineers that look, this is an important problem. We need to fix it now.
Let's address this. Like,
this is exactly this what I said. It's not politicians taking too long time. I mean, politicians can run ahead the society, and their work is indeed to, I mean, drag the society into a better future. But there is only a certain speed with which you can go, and this speed is determined by the emotion of the people. So it's not the slowness of the politicians, but just the emotional feeling of people about something. And this is actually which results in politicians being slow and politicians being blamed for it. But the reality is that the society as a whole, I mean, it's not rational. Scientists may agree, technicians may agree, but societies of human beings are simply not rational. It is, I don't know, I mean, we don't know really how rational are the packs of wolves, for example. It's difficult to gauge or understand, but probably our brains collectively make us more irrational than other species, who might probably go more, I mean, based on common sense.
Yeah. So irrational brains is one of the challenges to face. Any other challenges that stops us today with that coordination effort?
I mean, fundamentally, there is still kind of this game theoretic situation where there are so-called prisoner's dilemma equivalents. Where
explain that to me.
Prisoner's dilemma is a situation where we are put to different cells and we are asked to kind of give each other up. And it is in both our interests to give the other one up because that would save us some jail time. However, it is our collective interest to not rat on each other because then our average jail time would be smaller. So like and that there are kind of cases like that, like all the time, where there are kind of sort of local, national, and whatnot interest to do something. But we know that if every nation would do that, I mean, the global warming is a perfect example. Like it's in the kind of local interests to kind of produce a lot of energy, a lot of cheap energy from coal and whatnot. But like in the collective interest of the world, it's not. So like, how can we address those game theoretic issues?
It really seems like the strong connection and communication channels are needed across governments, across citizens. Like, do you see nations have taken effort there to kind of increase and enhance the communication when it comes to global challenge? Because me as a citizen, they seem so far away somewhere, like not our problems. Although we have very warm summers, warmer than ever again. Isn't that simply a communication problem or how to enhance?
No, it isn't. Actually, maybe Pactum can help here. Because, I mean, if really all nations trusted that this is their fair share of cost of fighting the climate change and going green, maybe they would accept it. But right now, there is absolutely no mechanism to determine what is their fair share. It cannot be related only their today's CO2 emissions. It has to be related to their living standards, because there are most nations globally who have not contributed for the last century to this high emissions. You have to take into account that. I mean, what is the living standard of a nation? What has it been before? Where it is now? Who has benefited how much already? But nevertheless, it is probably quite possible to figure out the rational algorithm which will tell how much each and every country has to make effort and to declare that technically this is the fair share burden sharing. It would be very interesting if somebody did this exercise. But probably nobody dares to even order it because, I mean, we know that, I mean, our emotional societies will not accept the result. And this is the worry. We cannot agree beforehand that we will all accept the result and then go by it. We cannot do it because people don't trust some, I mean, because they are all in this dilemma, trying to do the best thing, cheating by 5%. And since everybody's trying to cheat at least by 5%, maybe by 10%, get a little bit better deal for themselves, we do not get any deal. And that's why I really appreciate that the biggest and richest market, which is the European Union, has taken the decision and said we are big enough and rich enough to bear the burden of initial transfer. later on we will anyway reap, also economic benefits from the fact that we can, sell what we have discovered, in mass green energy production.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned the keyword trust there, because just if you think about the prisoner's dilemma, if I can't trust you to not give me up, then it's much easier for me to not give you up. And I think the same thing happens in kind of international agreements. We saw that with the biological weapons convention, that there just there was I guess some trust, but it was trust turned out to be misplaced in the end, because Soviet Union was continuing the bioweapons program. And so one way of putting it is that one way of I guess is the psychological way of saying this is a trust, but in theoretical terms it means that how can parties to credible commitments, what is the thing that they can say no, I'm going to do X, even local X is not kind of the best thing for me, but because I'm committing to this, because I've kind of done something very drastic.
Let's go now, we're smoothly going to the actual solutions and technology, and let's carry on this. I'm aware of, Jann, that you're very into crypto also and decentralized systems. Do you believe, very specific question topic, smart contracts could help governments in trust, that you don't need to trust the contracts kind of determine if this is filled, this is the result, what happens, and the kind of commitment is given there by a machine? Yes,
I think it's currently blockchains are kind of too small to regulate big governmental relations. However, they already work pretty well in sort of local economic situations where there indeed is way to do sort of trustless, credible commitments. I'm putting this security deposit here, and if I misbehave, I'm going to lose this deposit. Hence, if I am a prisoner's dilemma and I can put security deposit here, you can already trust that I'm not going to give you up to some degree. And now the question is, how can these things be scaled up to the level where at least small governments and eventually bigger and bigger governments could kind of use these sort of neutral coordination technology to improve the sort of game theoretic situation globally.
And I really think that this, I appreciate that there is a role for this kind of, proving to people that what they are doing is fair, and also in this way using blockchains in societies. But the problem with blockchain and trust-based therefore kind of architecture for societies is that the blockchain got tangled with money. Talk about money. And money needs an economy, and economy of a certain size supports a certain amount of money. And now if we think about blockchain in the different terms, somebody promises somebody something and then gets something else back, or gets a promotion or whatever, and this is written in the blockchain, kind of trust-based chain, then if we can somehow separate this from thinking this is money, I think we could move forward. But the trouble with it was that very soon people started to think about it as it's a real money, but money needs economy, and it is not money, it is something different. And you can, of course, at some point, somewhere, count it into the real money. But what we currently are seeing is definitely not this, and it's really eating into the trust of blockchain-based solutions for societies.
I think this is also a reflection of this emotional versus rational thing.
But it is.
Because the blockchain is the kind of the most visible and emotional thing about it is just the speculation.
Yes, precisely.
In some ways, kind of it sort of overshadows the interesting thing about it. And
exactly.
The interesting thing about it is that they are sort of tools for game theoretic mechanism design, and there's a lot of innovation happening right now. The question is can these new things that are right now being developed in cryptography and game mechanism design, can they help global coordination?
But this is exactly what I all the time get to talk about in international fora. As soon as you try to explain, how blockchain can help to fast forward processes in the society of coming to conclusions, taking decisions and all this, then people automatically associate this as with money. And then you're on a really dangerous ground, particularly if you, Kaspar still remembers this discussion of the e-token. Estcoin, indeed. Then you try to rebrand it into e-token, but still you made ACB nervous. Because I mean, people automatically associated this. I mean, trust is not exactly money, but it's too similar, and people are not able to distinguish between.
But I did hear that ECB now is trying to do their cryptocurrency after a few years of fighting against that. So
true, but then you would use blockchain as a technology for, I mean, handling your currency. But the money would still be money, which will reflect the size of the economy. Whereas you can imagine the blockchain-based processes which do not involve producing money.
Yeah.
So one reason why blockchains are very focused on money and kind of economical mechanisms in particular is that currently they are not scalable. So like all the transactions are very expensive, which means that the first applications are things that can pay those transaction costs. However, there are plans to increase the scalability of blockchains. I'm a big fan of Ethereum myself and know the people who are working on it, so that kind of basic transactions would be much cheaper. And once you have that, then you can have like non-economic applications because then you can just afford those costs. And once you have non-economic applications, I would expect that this stigma that this is just for speculation would actually kind of dilute a bit, at least, hopefully.
Can we touch
if anybody understood it, then definitely I agree with you. But I mean, it takes me myself each and every time 5 minutes of free education to remind myself that this is true. And I've seen that for many people, this is incomprehensible, that you can separate the two.
Sure.
Yeah, I remember, Jann, you introduced me to Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum in that sense. And back then, no one knew what is Ethereum or Ether. And he was giving a lecture in the University of Tallinn, I think. And there were like 3 persons listening to him. I was like later like laughing that if people would have known that they can physically meet this crazy talent, it would be crowded. Let's speak about other technology now. Besides, we touched the topic of trust and then the trust machine of blockchain and how this could help in coordination. Jann, maybe I'll approach you first, like a general question. You as a tech evangelist globally. In that sense, what other technologies are out there today which you see that have already been used in supporting global coordination and fighting with these challenges, or you see in the very near future could be there to help assist people?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of any kind of purely technological solutions other than just using Excel and things like that.
I was also thinking of global e-bills and these things which were supranationally to a certain extent function. EIDAS, European signature, digital signature system, for example, something like this. But I cannot go more complex neither.
Yeah, no, I mean like the vaccination passports, I guess, and things like that, sure. But sort of like these are kind of very specific things. Like generally, I do think I'm very interested in blockchains, how it will grow and can it be adopted to things that are kind of value creating in terms of coordination. And yes, AI. I think the thing about AI is that you can think of it as sort of competent non-human decision makers. And another question is how do you introduce competent non-human decision makers into society without breaking it?
Yeah.
And one way to do that is to basically try to tap into this competence in order to keep this competence under control, which is...
I can, for the audience also, I can briefly introduce what we do at Pactum, and then we can align and see whether this is useful in wider society. So we are automating enterprise negotiations. So our clients like Walmart and other Fortune 500s have tens of thousands of suppliers, vendors, partners, and our AI reaches them out and reaches better deals. And on a high level, it's very simple what we do. We understand what are the terms that can be negotiated. Then we understand the value of those terms, and then the AI can do trade-offs so that both parties are better off, reaching Pareto optimum deals. So when we take this high-level framework and thinking of how in private sector, when a few years ago no one believed autonomous negotiations are possible, and today they're live, every minute actually happening, taking this concept to public sector, a next level, solving global coordination and with multiple stakeholders, not one-to-one. Could we use similar kind of thinking, although it's very rational, which we discussed before, that we want to be emotional in this context, but rationally listing all the terms and understanding them internally, the value or cost of that with our society, with our citizens, and then providing, and AI helps them to make trade-offs. So what do you think about Is something like this possible? You see, Madam President, that nations would be willing to try out technology to solve these global challenges if we are really struggling with them?
I haven't seen any attempts to do so, even in the environments where on supranational level we are commonly agreeing. I mean, for example, what would be easier than to take the European Union multi-annual financial framework? We know what we want to achieve with it. We know how much we want to distribute for climate change, and then create based on that the financial regulation of the Union, which would, treat each and everybody equally. Yet we see each and every time when we are going to the financial regulation, everybody tries to tweak this technical document, because even with technical terms, I understand this is exactly what Pactum is doing. Little technical tweaking, which will, make some win here, lose there, give in something somewhere else. This is exactly what the human minds do as well. And the problem why we are not doing it is that we haven't agreed beforehand that it has to be absolutely equally distributed, all the benefits and all the pains and all the gains. And we simply have never seen, even among the friends, a supranational agreement where it is not taken as granted that everybody tries to get the best terms for themselves. And the compilation and the final result normally is suboptimal if you consider the final outcome, let's say European economic development. But it looks most likely to every emotional national public that this is the best deal for particular country.
So again, like kind of multinational prisoners dilemma, like everybody basically.
Let's take our own dilemma, our own discussion. We needed absolutely that Rail Baltic should be financed 85% from the EU budget, because it was in our coalition agreement that if it is lower, we might not build it. So we went to the discussion table with something really set in stone.
Yeah.
And then then we couldn't achieve probably in some other areas, agricultural support, rural development, social fund, something which we might otherwise achieve, because we were not free to trade in this 85% clause.
Very interesting question regarding trade-offs. Let's speak about one society like Estonia. There is this term what we use also in Pactum, multiple equivalent simultaneous offers, that I'm making you two offers, Madam President. They are equal value to me. So I don't kind of care which you choose, but they're very different in the context. So you would definitely prefer one over other. So what if we are doing these mesos in society level and ask our citizens there, like, hey, would you like 5% pension increase while you would have 10% less social workers who deal with you? Like, I can put that budget here, At the moment, we're all promising something, promising more money, promising lowering taxes, everything. But what if we start communicating with trade-offs internally also in the society, so that we know that everything we gain, we will lose something in return for that. And we make society to then make these decisions.
I'm idealist myself to a certain extent, which means that I believe endlessly to explaining people. If they are being too emotional about something which is not at all emotional. But think back about this debate about should we have same-sex marriage or should we not have a same-sex marriage. People who are married to the person of another sex absolutely do not win or lose anything about whether this is permitted or not. This explains to you the amount of, this you cannot describe. As soon as you can describe something, you can automate it, but you cannot describe this. And that's our main problem. We are very far from being able to describe this kind of a problem. If we could, then we could, of course, resolve it by technology. I don't know. Maybe, Jann, you already know of technologies which would be able to describe these emotional aspects in society and make algorithms out of them. Not, simple things like how to create bubbles, in society, but for this kind of complex solution seeking.
Yeah, so to answer that, I think this is like a very dangerous area, because there are kind of economic incentives that push people, companies and whatnot, whatever entities, to model people's emotions and then manipulate them. So that is the problem with Facebook. That is the problem with various kind of political campaign manipulations, etc. So I think it's kind of I don't think this should be like the first solution that kind of internationally we should try, just figure out people's emotions and then try to manipulate them. I do think that, however, one way to kind of address, try to bring kind of more non-human decision making, let's put it that way, into negotiations is to similar thing that was happening in blockchain, which means that as you're doing these negotiations in economic context, you sort of build empirical experience and trust in those systems to some degree. And then you can, like, once you have a system that has already been used and has generated value, it's much easier to promote it to political context rather than just immediately try to push them there.
It's a very valid point, yeah.
So you have to cover at least 60% of the US economy with Pactum deals before you even attempt to resolve a problem in a local community. Got it? Jann said so. And he's the man I really trust in trusting technology or not trusting technology.
It's a great challenge. I accept that. And to be honest, then we have seen that things in public sector take time, even in Estonia, which is a very digitally advanced nation. So I think when this happens with us in 7 years' time, we can already start preparing the launch of autonomous negotiations then in public sector now. Let's speak about launch. Let's hypothetically say that the issues of trust and the issues of irrationality in decision making and the issues of like a prisoner's dilemma, that Jann, together with different folks, will figure things out with other people interested in global coordination. And we solve them somehow, to some extent. And we are coming to the phase of actual execution of some technology, some AI, which helps us in this coordination. And sometimes the execution is the most difficult part, right? Like we know what can be done, and we know in digital societies, like we have talked about Estonia and how digital identity is needed and digital signature is needed global to most of the nations. And 2 decades later, still no progress or very little progress. So execution is problematic in public sector, in governments, international organizations. Do you believe, Madam President, that when we are lacking the execution skills in government or local level, like could we do technological implementation executions across governments, international organizations? Is it like realistic at all to consider it?
Well, as you know, I mean, good things globally get done only if we have people who are compassionate about other human beings. I mean, this is again something which, I mean, is in no way tech related. Yeah. So I do doubt it, actually. And I mean, humans are finally the ones who have to take decisions. Even if you say this is the technology, I set the parameters objectively, it has come to this conclusion of solution.
Yes.
We all have experiences with technology where those who have programmed technology have put their own bias into this technology. The most well-known, of course, is the gender bias. I mean, all Estonians, particularly on 8th of March, loved, playing with Google, putting into Google sentences. Like, in Estonian language, we do not have, as you know, words don't have sex. So you would say, someone is assertive in Estonian, and Google Translate, he is assertive. And then you say, someone has a beautiful body, and Google Translate, she has a beautiful body. How on earth can I trust such technologies? There is bias in technology. This is a very simply understood bias. But if you have a much more complex system, how do I know that this distribution of the cost of getting to green economy, that this does not somehow bias small island states, least developed nations, best developed nations? Even they don't want to be biased against, even if they deserve it, because, they caused the problem.
Madam President, but what if I challenge you and say that, hey, we are biased, we built this biased technology, but then there are some good folks who notice, it's bias here, and we'll fix the bug. Let's call it a bug. And next time the machine, next day, it doesn't have the bias. But imagine like training the whole society, everyone, not to have bias. We can't train not to have bias. It's like so inbuilt of us. Like it takes so much effort. But for machine, it's a code. Like maybe one day we start trusting code more because we know that it is more unbiased in negotiations.
I admit that technologies can be built to be far more unbiased than human beings. Yet our trust into them being unbiased, where should that stem from? There are, even now I've heard, I think during the last month, we in Europe think technologies must be able to explain themselves to us and their decisions to us. I heard from some advisors of the US administration saying this is impossible. I mean, if you go into this kind of discussion, then it demonstrates that we are not on the same wavelength, really. I know Jann wants technology to be, able to explain itself to us and therefore, keep it safe and in check, because you are thinking of the technologies which really could be harmful to all of us because they're too smart. So for me, it's very important that technologies themselves are able to turn themselves inside out and prove to us. Yet we are tackling with something really simple, in these terms, what we are here talking, 5G. And we are not able to set technical criteria by which we would agree that this 5G really, has explained itself to us and it's not stealing our data. Should be, child's play compared to when we are talking about real and true artificial intelligence. Yet we are not doing it. I don't know why. I know nothing of technology.
I can give one example why it is very difficult for the AI, let's say the black box, to explain. Like just recently, Pactum made an offer and the offer was rejected by the supplier. And then supplier made counter-offer, we rejected that, the AI rejected that, and made 2 offers. And those 2 offers were just so beautiful, what the AI made. And we're like, oh, wow, very good offers, like changing terms and being very extreme. And we thought, like, I would have never come to this. And then for me to explain, like, how this offer was generated through AI, they went through tens of millions of different variations of these contracts, and it's not able to explain to me. And I don't know. So even for us, like so early stage company, for us it's difficult to say where these decisions are coming from.
I think you're pointing to like really kind of a well-known thing in kind of negotiation theory, which is that there is like so-called zero-sum negotiations where like somebody's just trying to push one parameter one way and the other is pushing back, and then there are kind of non-zero-sum trying to find solutions that initially didn't occur to either party or any of the parties. And I think like one way that AI could, although there are some risks there of manipulation and whatnot, be kind of added as a sort of creative engine of exactly doing the things that you mentioned. In which case it would just like, okay, here are a bunch of solutions. You humans do what you think is best. I think that's like a more trustable thing than like, okay, you should have this much and you should have that much. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in that case, you normally, human beings are able to come up with a lower number of solutions, and they have difficulties in agreeing on any of them already. Are you really making negotiations easier? I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
even if I admit that I would be on a stronger technological and scientific basis probably if AI has figured out these solutions and really said that side effects are controlled and measured and you can trust these kind of solutions. I'm not sure still that we would be able to have quicker conclusions.
The idea is to basically have AI provide solutions that just didn't occur to anyone. And then like if there's a solution that didn't occur to anyone and everybody agrees that this is better than anything they considered so far, it's a Pareto improvement. So there isn't a lot of trust required. Some trust still. There might be some kind of weird manipulative tactics that AI is kind of making you feel that this is a supporting improvement. I normally
would automatically think of the side effects which the AI might consider unimportant. But it would be important.
There's still like a plethora of problems there, but like
supporting Madam President's point is that it is difficult to compare and for me to choose which is better. For example, even within one specific contract, it can be difficult whether I want to receive money 10 days later while getting 1% discount. Like I could do it, but when we speak about terms that are very different in nature, let's say that are you ready, dear Republic of Estonia, to increase the immigration rate by 10% while, and now they random other term there, while we are increasing your CO2 emission bonus rate by 15%. Like, who can do that kind of trade-off? One is monetary, other is so many social other aspects. And now I'm getting this A-B different contracts by the AI stating which one I would prefer. I have no idea.
So one kind of solution that has been proposed by some economists, and I do think it's interesting at the very least, is using prediction markets. So like if you're given this like multi-dimensional parameters to choose from, then you can basically go and ask people to bet money that like which thing would be more important, like which setting would kind of yield greater satisfaction and something that is measurable down the line. So and then you basically have money on the line, and people have actually incentive to think, people and organizations.
But we tend to be collectively wrong sometimes in predicting, for example, economic futures as well. In your dilemma, I mean, there is actually in politics there is a really bad behavior is to mix apples and oranges, and you normally try to, especially in EU, this is really pronounced principle. You do not trade in one area, I mean, at the expense of the other. I mean,
but it would go against Pareto optimum, meaning that to reach better deals for both parties, we need to extend the contract space. We need to speak about as many terms possible in order to make trade-offs. The more narrower the scope, the less trade-offs we can do. But I understand it's difficult to...
But you have to take also timeline into account. I mean, there is no such thing like, I mean, world is permanently moving on. I mean, I remember myself, I wrote 6 years ago an article in Eesti Express which said that we should agree to changes to Dublin mechanism of resolving, I mean, migration-related issues in the European Union, because we never know when they are behind our borders. Now they are behind our borders today. But 6 years ago we were not, I mean, ready to relent because we didn't see any risk. I mean, I took another example. I had an example where Sosnovyj Bor simply blew up, and then there were many people, in addition, ill, queuing at our borders, trying to enter. What shall we do?
Right.
And now we have a different situation. We have a migration as a weapon being used against Lithuania. But I mean, 6-7 years ago, if we had foreseen it, we would probably been much more, I mean, open to looking for quick solutions, but we didn't see it as coming. So you have to also take timeline in these decisions, which is very important. And I mean, what Jann proposed, I mean, means that each and everybody predicts what happens over the time. If we are collectively right, then you get really, I mean, a balanced decision, but we don't know it, I mean, in advance.
Well, the idea of prediction markets, of course, is that like people who are more right, they will sort of survive on the markets, and people who are consistently wrong, they will lose their money and not come back. So it's like you will have this filter effect.
Exactly. This is like an enterprise going wrong doesn't matter for economy as a whole. I mean, the quicker it fails, the better you would release, I mean, resources to try something new. But I mean, if you take it a narrower scope, a particular enterprise or a town where this enterprise was a really important provider, then you have different look at the things. And this is also in political debate.
Yeah. One of the last topics I would like to touch on is do we need nations to be on the same level of AI development, also considering AI ethics and principles and values? Do we need some nations to kind of lead the way and show us where it should all go? And comparing larger nations and small nations like Estonia, which can be more agile, but maybe doesn't have that power globally when it comes to this decision-making and global coordination efforts. So maybe first to Jann, to you, like what role do you see nation-states and should they train each other? Should we be aligning our development in terms of AI?
I mean, it's probably not realistic to kind of have everyone be exactly on the same level unless we ban the developments, then everybody's at the zero level. But I do think that, and that is kind of, there's like an increasing realization in AI research community that this is not like a simple usual technology where that is kind of best governed by whoever invests in it. And for example, one of my latest investments was a company called Anthropic. And it's kind of from the start, it's by the developers of GPT-3, the famous language model. And it's they kind of specifically, first of all, they created this company as a public benefit corporation, which is like a form of cooperation in the US. And second, they are really thinking about long-term governance, like how to ensure that the short-term profit interests are not going to be dominating the decision-making in the company like 5, 10, 20 years down the road.
I don't think countries need to be at the same level of development. On the other hand, we need to extend our rules-based world order into the digital sphere. And let's start from very simple. GPS. Most people probably nowadays think it's some kind of a natural resource, which it isn't. It's a resource made available globally with, I mean, certain self-restraint that it is not being used for our political objectives. Therefore, I mean, different countries who have no part in developing GPS can trust it, use it, develop, I mean, business cases on it, basically invest against GPS system, and I mean, no, they can trust it. We need to have for artificial intelligence similar framework, which means that it has to be developed and controlled by democratic societies. And this is the big war of 21st century. Who controls our networks? Starting from 5G, which is probably, few magnitudes simpler problem than AI. Who controls these networks? Do the democratic world has control it, which then can exercise this self-restraint, which is natural to us, to make sure that everybody could benefit and the risks are relatively low, or cannot. And the same applies also to artificial intelligence. If at one point democracies lose control of the technology, that it becomes basically developed and a tool for autocratic totalitarian regimes, then we are in a deep trouble globally, because then we cannot trust to use them anymore, because the option of using it may be taken from us because we are not politically well complying with some demands.
Would you say that to reach to these AI kind of regulations and agreements, like for me it seems it's very difficult to do it on theoretical level. Examples and test cases are needed in real life. Could Estonia be testbed for AI also? Usually we are testbed for our own government solutions with our citizens. Could we become a testbed for global coordination efforts and AI efforts and show the way kind of how to do it?
Well, definitely. We have this Accelerator Estonia, which has promised that if tech companies come up with ideas which serve our society, we will modify according to our legal space so that everybody could benefit. Why Accelerator Estonia is good? Normally, I'm deeply against government money in any business. But here, if the government puts some skin in themselves, they probably move quicker in the parliament to adjust if the legal space needs to be adjusted. But we are very far yet in Estonia to create kind of e-governance model or digital society model 3.0, where we will try to agree with our people what are the general principles of how we handle AI and cross-sectorally and across the technological development up to the level of singularity. Because if you try to regulate it, it's best to do it once. It will work for all lower levels there. And this is something which I hope that with this Accelerator Estonia, if there will be AI projects included, we will start understanding about this permissive legal space which we need to create. This is, I think, the best hope for us to do it. And indeed, Estonia must be the only country who thinks this way about it right now.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear audience, thank you for being with us for so long time. And the time is running up, so I have one call to action to you. As you just witnessed, the President of Estonia, Jann, and also from Pactum side, we are eager to think along what could be the next global challenges, what we can solve through global coordination, and how to use AI there. So, could you please write to me, Kaspar@pactum.com, and give us some ideas, like what would be the first scope? Let's address that as a startup. What would be the small scope of global challenge we could try in Estonia as a testbed to solve globally through AI? And we'll think about that and we'll come back to you. Thank you for listening, and Madam President and Jann Tallinn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Always very educative to talk with you tech people. Thank you.